Science Fiction University.
Hello, and welcome to Science Fiction University.
In this episode, Be Seeing You, we look at a work of science fiction that came out of nowhere and changed everything. We're your fan and writer hosts. I'm Blue Gal.
And I'm Driftglass, and you can visit Science Fiction University at our website, sciencefictionuniversity.com, where you can also contribute to this podcast. There is a Patreon button at our website. Or you can mail us a letter and or contribution, care of Science Fiction University, P.O. Box 9133, Springfield, Illinois, 62791. And we're going to start this episode off a little unusually by reading an obituary. And we're going to read it in the wrong order. So how's that for mind-blowing? This is the second paragraph of Patrick McGoohan's 2009 obituary, and it reads as follows. Quote, McGoohan was, at the time, 1967, the highest-earning British TV star, paid £2,000 a week through appearing in a highly successful secret agent series called Danger Man, in which he was John Drake, a European security man who, on McGoohan's own insistence, never carried a gun or seduced a woman, unquote. He was very Catholic, that McGoohan.
Mm-hmm.
I understand he stayed married to the same woman for how many years, Blue Gal?
58 years until he died.
See? He was not Danger Man in real life.
No.
Now, so by 1967, he had some real clout in the TV industry. And how he used that clout was the first paragraph in his obituary. Quote, the handsome and steady-eyed Patrick McGoohan, who has died at age 80, was the star, co-writer, and sometimes director of one of British television's most original and challenging series of the 1960s, The Prisoner. In it, he played Number 6, a mysterious, resigned former secret agent who was always trying to escape from The Village, an apparently congenial community, which is in fact a virtual prison for people who know too much. They are allowed to be comfortable there only if they conform completely and not try to escape, which he was trying to do all the time. Now, this is the story of a 1967 television series called The Prisoner, which starred McGoohan, which he co-created. He also wrote a couple of episodes and directed an episode. And although we will try to be as spoiler-free as possible, this episode will contain some spoilers for The Prisoner, which, as we said, is 56 years old, a British TV series, and is currently available on Freevee streaming service.
And Driftglass, let me interrupt and just say, there are podcasts that have done blow by blow, episode by episode, deep dives into The Prisoner. And they are still out there, and you can go and listen to them, and we recommend that.
Yes.
Search for The Prisoner on your podcast streaming service, and you will find some good ones. We're not going to do that.
No.
We're here to just provide some context and background to a show that we really like, and give you a little bit of some angles as to how The Prisoner fits into its time and space.
Exactly. And we have subtitled this episode, The Last Temptation of Number 6.
Yes.
So first, Blue Gal, did you know that Rod Serling wrote a Western?
Really? What does that have to do with The Prisoner?
I know. I know you'd ask that. Rod Serling's Western was called The Loner. Not a loner as in a loner car, but as a loner, a lone man, alone on a horse out in the West. It starred Lloyd Bridges, who you might know as Jeff Bridges' father. It was Rod Serling's thinking man Western, and he used his Twilight Zone clout to get it made, and he wrote every episode. And it ran for one season and was canceled.
Oh,
now,
that's similar to The Prisoner. One season and canceled is,
So
okay.
Why are we talking about Rod Serling if this episode's about The Prisoner? Fair question. Because if you talk about The Prisoner, it's important to understand the state of television and what was going on in the world in the mid to late 60s, when it existed, when it was created, when it was conceived, and to understand how just miraculous it was that it got made at all. And the fact that more than half a century later it still holds up is virtually impossible, but here we are.
This is when Paddy Chayefsky was writing for Goodyear Playhouse, Kraft Theater, and the Gulf Playhouse. And Abby Mann wrote Judgment at Nuremberg, and Reginald Rose wrote 12 Angry Men. And then there was Rod Serling, who, amazing, there's no end to Rod Serling's greatness. He'd already won 3 Emmys. Serling believed, quote, "The writer's role is to be a menacer of the public's conscience."
Amen, baby. Amen.
I love that line.
Mhm.
He must have a position, a point of view. The author must see the arts as a vehicle of social criticism, and he must focus the issues of his time, unquote. At this time in the United States, there were no television series that successfully operated outside the limits imposed by sponsors. Television was incredibly conformist, and controversy was a dirty word. So, other than dramatic theatrical programs like Playhouse 90 and General Electric Theater, using the medium of television to take on serious or existential questions just was not done.
And even during that very brief golden age, it just didn't last long. There was no way it could continue itself. This live television, serious adult dramas like 12 Angry Men and Judgment at Nuremberg. Networks and sponsors began pulling the plug on serious live TV dramas or just censoring them to death because they thought it was too highbrow for the audiences they were trying to sell beer to or cars to. So, for example, when Rod Serling tried to pitch a teleplay about the lynching of Emmett Till, the sponsors and censors and the network executives just stopped him dead in his tracks. Now, at this point, with 3 Emmys on his mantle, Serling was the most successful dramatic television writer working anywhere. And when he pitched the idea to the representatives of the U.S. Steel Hour, he had already pre-censored himself by changing the story to a Jewish pawnbroker who would be lynched in the South. However, because Rod Serling could not stop talking, he gave an interview to the Daily Variety where he mentioned that the script in progress was based on the Till murder trial. And newspapers all over the country picked up the scoop and ran with it, which in turn triggered thousands of angry letters and wires from white supremacist organizations threatening both the Steel Hour and ABC and Serling personally. And ABC and the Steel Hour immediately capitulated and ordered changes to Serling's script. The changes were very aggressive. By the time the teleplay finally aired, any hint of the South had been removed from the plot, and not even a Coca-Cola bottle could appear out of fear viewers might think it was taking place in the South. Instead, the introduction stressed that the story was set in New England, I believe. To quote Rod Serling one more time, he's very quotable, "We tilted at the same dragons for 7 or 8 years, and after the smoke cleared, the dragons had won. Live television was history, so the summons came and the writers went west."
In other words, they went into the movie industry.
Yeah, they went to Hollywood because
Yeah.
this was all taking place in New York, and that was the
Right.
center of culture and center of television
And
plays.
TV. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But they
It
went to
wasn't
Hollywood.
Burbank yet. Yeah.
And they went to Hollywood where it was trashy and, commercial and stuff, but that they paid. So off they went.
Yeah. Then Serling had a stroke of genius. He pitched a little half-hour fantasy science fiction program, which obviously wasn't going to challenge or offend anyone since it was, fantasy and science fiction. The pilot episode was called Where Is Everyone? It starred Earl Holliman as a test subject in a NASA sensory deprivation experiment. It wasn't great or memorable, but it wasn't intended to be. Serling wrote it for one reason, to sell network executives on the show, which was called The Twilight Zone.
Yeah. And by the time executives found out what they'd bought, sorry, it's too late. We're already rolling.
Yep.
And they never understood the show, but they had a really strong producer who defended the show against networks trying to shut it down. And that's why it succeeded.
And it worked. It also opened the door by showing serious writers who wanted to write about serious issues that if you camouflage your work in science fiction, you might just get away with it. Serling got to say what he wanted to say by switching genres. Observations you simply could not make about contemporary social issues in a Steel Hour drama you could put into the mouths of men from Mars. Same with Star Trek, which was sold to the network as Wagon Train in Space. And everyone loves Wagon Train, right? Go ahead.
Sure.
We'll fund that. So that's what writing was like for television in the 1960s.
Yeah, it was incredibly claustrophobic, and the censors, the censors were the sponsors, and the sponsors ran everything. Now, a second thing to understand about the 60s was how big Ian Fleming's James Bond novels had become by this time. The movie rights hadn't been negotiated by 1959, but Fleming had already published 8 Bond novels by this time. They were, in order, Casino Royale, Live and Let Die, Moonraker, Diamonds Are Forever, From Russia with Love, Dr. No, Goldfinger, which is my favorite, and for your eyes only. And with all that was happening in the culture, in 1960, Sir Lou Grade's ITC Entertainment in Britain was looking to develop a spy show it could export to the US, which could then be syndicated. And that's how Danger Man, starring Patrick McGoohan, came to be in existence.
And we have watched every Danger Man followed by every Prisoner.
Yes.
In a row.
Even the last 2 crappy episodes of Danger Man.
Yeah.
In color.
They were crap. But yes.
And which clearly, and these were the 2 after which McGoohan just bailed and said, I'm not doing this anymore. You have your episodes. I'm going over here to do that. So
over the years, there had been an ongoing argument between the co-creators of The Prisoner, McGoohan and George Markstein, over whether The Prisoner is Danger Man's sequel. But in our house, there is no disagreement at all.
Nope, none.
Some of the actors who appeared in Danger Man also show up in The Prisoner. Be Seeing You was the standard village farewell in The Prisoner and was also one of McGoohan's catchphrases in Danger Man. Get over it. It's obvious to me and to anyone watching these shows in order that The Prisoner is John Drake.
Yes.
And it's obviously a sequel. The only reason The Prisoner exists is the deal Patrick McGoohan made with Lou Grade after CBS pulled the plug on the half-hour version of Danger Man in 1962. We should talk about Danger Man for just a second, because those half-hour episodes are so elegant and Spartan and well done.
Yeah.
And there's no postscript to them. When he solves whatever it is, the show's over. That's it. Yeah.
And the theme
really
music
fills each episode with the activity of the spy world.
Yes. And it's all passion. It's all efficient and professional. And when you're done, you're done. Mission's over.
You're done. And it's over. And there are some episodes where it's said that he works for NATO. Mm-hmm. There are other episodes where it appears that he's a freelance person for the West. He always works for the West.
The West.
He doesn't work for the other side.
No.
But these little half-hour episodes are fantastic.
They are.
And I don't think that giving it extra time was a bad thing. The longer ones in the second season are good too. But as an exercise in writing, these incredibly tight 30-minute scripts are just fantastic.
And a key to their success is make your opening theme song slapping. Make it great.
It is so slapping.
It's also like almost like a haiku in the way it's limited. It has no budget. This show is just, styrofoam trees and the same 5 sets used over and over again.
Yep.
And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter because they're so well written and so well acted.
We finally just started cracking up about the elevator.
Yeah.
Because there's one elevator, and at one point it's a hotel, and another one it's a pied-à-terre, and whatever it is, but it's that same damn elevator, and there's a receptionist desk next to it, whether it's a hotel or a hospital or whatever. It's like, oh, there's the elevator again.
And then comes the B-roll stock footage of some other country,
Yes, right.
Either Pan Am or something else, a plane, a recognizable TWA landing in some other country. And then you have stock footage of people in the streets in that other country. Then we cut to the Lou Grade Studios set, which is now vaguely Middle Eastern.
Yes, right.
But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because it's so well done and so tight and so entertaining. But it was canceled after 2 years, and then it went on hiatus.
But between 1962 and 1964, Danger Man was the bomb. Yeah. It was serialized around the world. It turned out it was just so popular. We looked up the show, and there were Danger Man lunchboxes. There were Danger Man novels. There were everything, And, of course, by that time, James Bond had become even more popular. And ABC's The Avengers was a hit. So in 1964... McGoohan came back to do a retooled 50-minute version, as I said, of Danger Man in exchange for Lou Grade's promise that he would bankroll a future series McGoohan had in mind.
A
year after Danger Man originally went on the air, John le Carré published his first novel, Call for the Dead. By the time Danger Man had been canceled and resurrected, le Carré had published 2 more novels, A Murder of Quality and The Spy Who Came In from the Cold. And the spy espionage show had become a full-fledged genre, and it was everywhere.
a quick note, the spy who came in from the cold was on my parents' bookcase
Yep.
by the front door of our house. I think every parent who wanted to feel kind of urbane and sophisticated had a copy of that book somewhere in their house.
Yeah. Yeah. So, in addition to Danger Man, there was Man from U.N.C.L.E. in 1964, I Spy, Get Smart, Wild Wild West, Mission Impossible, The Baron, Callan in 1967, The Champions in 1968, and Department S in 1969.
And leading the pack was this hugely popular retooled show called Danger Man. And McGoohan now had all the clout he needed to quit Danger Man and get The Prisoner into production. So now we catch up with The Prisoner. So Danger Man ran for 86 episodes. As we said, it's still very rewatchable. We enjoy it very much. It made McGoohan wealthy and famous, but it's now mostly forgotten. I mean, we're still fans, but you don't hear a lot of people doing deep dives into Danger Man these days. On the other hand, The Prisoner ran for only 17 episodes. And honestly, maybe half of those it could have, disappeared. And it was, at times, a pretty troubled production. For example, they built this very cool, expensive robot that was supposed to be the village's security enforcer, which immediately sank to the bottom of the sea the first time they let it out of the box. So a lot of money literally flushed into the ocean. The strain of filming the next to last episode, the one called Once Upon a Time, caused Leo McGoohan to suffer either a nervous breakdown or a heart attack, which forced production to stop for a while. And after that last episode aired, legend has it that Patrick McGoohan was forced to go into hiding, and the TV switchboards crashed due to calls from irate viewers, all of which sounds pretty disastrous. And yet The Prisoner is the first paragraph in McGoohan's obituary, and it still holds up more than a half a century later, and it had this huge downstream effect on television and movies and culture.
And people are still podcasting about it today.
They are.
We're not unique to doing that. It's like I said, you can find other people talking about it in 2023. The story of The Prisoner apparently originated from a simple question. What happens to scientists and bureaucrats and spies who know too much if they decide to quit their jobs? The series posits that the answer to this question is a luxurious prison called The Village, which is located on an island somewhere and run by an unseen supervillain called Number One. The story opens with McGoohan, who is only ever referred to as Number Six, angrily resigning his high-level top-secret position with the British government. He races home in his fancy Lotus sports car, by the way, and hurriedly packs for a trip when he is drugged and secretly transported to the island prison, which is only ever referred to as the Village, where he awakes in an exact replica of his own London apartment. It is the best series opening ever. It is wordless. It is absolutely frames Patrick McGoohan as the hero of this story. It tells the story. As I said, there's no dialogue. You just have the bongo drums and the hot music going. It's another banger theme.
Well, but it's a two-part opening because the first part is completely wordless when he resigns, when he drives home. And then when he opens his window, you get the opening title of the show, and then you get the dialogue between Number Two and Number Six. And it's so it's cinematic and it's gorgeous and we watch it every time because it's always a little bit different every time.
Every time. You can't skip it.
No.
Because the dialogue is, what do you want? Information. And it's a different Number Two. So
that's right. Leo McGoohan plays Number Two twice, 3 times, depending on how you count. And the last time that Patrick McGoohan asks the question, who is Number One, Leo McGoohan changes the stress in the sentence of the response, which is, it's always, you are Number Six. And he changes it to, you are Number Six. Like, okay, I'm getting a clue here. I'm getting a little bit of a clue here. We're not going to spoil it for you, but there are lots of hints along the way about where the story's going.
We learn that Number Six knows too much for the powers behind the Village to be allowed to go free, and that the entire plot will turn on whether or not they can force him to answer the question, quote, why did you resign, unquote. But we also learn that for some reason, Number Six is too important for the Village administrators to damage him by torturing him until he gives up that one piece of information. Instead, a rotating cast of middle management villains, all called Number Two, and there is a woman number 2 at
There are
one
a couple
point.
of them, actually.
Yeah. Use various psychological methods to try to get number 6 to answer their question and conform to the rules of the village. Using the spy espionage genre and the character he created in Danger Man, make no mistake, McGoohan sets the stage to ask big existential questions about human nature and the demands of society for conformity versus the primacy of the individual on a show that was airing at the height of the Cold War and as the youth counterculture was a rising force all over the world. Many of the questions the prisoner poses are never definitively answered, which is a characteristic of complex adult dramas, but almost never happens in genre television.
For example, the most obvious predecessor of The Prisoner are novels like 1984 and Brave New World. In 1984, the protagonist is tortured, and in the end, we think he's going to be killed. At least that's the end of most people who are eventually converted, because the goal of the state is identical to the goal of the village, which is conversion. They want to win you over. They haven't beaten you until they've turned you into them. This is from Orwell's 1984. Quote, O'Brien smiled slightly. You're a flaw in the pattern, Winston. You're a stain that must be wiped out. Did I not tell you just now that we are different from the persecutors of the past? We are not content with negative obedience, nor even with the most abject submission. When finally you surrender to us, it must be of your own free will. We do not destroy the heretic because he resists us. So long as he resists us, we never destroy him. We convert him. We capture his inner mind. We reshape him. We burn all evil and all illusion out of him. We bring him over to our side, not in appearance, but genuinely, heart and soul. We make him one of ourselves before we kill him. It is intolerable to us that an erroneous thought should exist anywhere in the world, however secret and powerless it may be, unquote. But the story of one person rebelling against the system goes back much, much further than that. Sophocles' play Antigone from 441 BC is the story of Antigone defying the decisions of her uncle Creon and attempting to bury the body of her brother because her relationship with her brother is more important than human laws. In 399 BC, guy named Socrates. You ever heard of him? He was convicted by the citizens of Athens of, quote, failing to acknowledge the gods that the city acknowledges, unquote, and, quote, introducing new deities, unquote, and he was sentenced to death for this kind of heresy. This is the story of Kafka's The Penal Colony. It's the story of Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. It's the story of Herman Melville's Billy Budd. And we subtitled this episode The Last Temptation of Number 6 because of the close parallels between The Prisoner and Martin Scorsese's 1988 religious epic, The Last Temptation of Christ, in which he reimagines the New Testament story of the capture, trial, and execution of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, if you haven't seen it, you should go out and see it right now. It's a terrific movie. It's not heretical. You're not going to lose your soul if you watch it. It's actually very, very good. And it asks a really provocative question about what is it that actually would be the most tempting thing you could offer Jesus Christ. So as Christ is dying on the cross, Satan appears disguised as his guardian angel and tells him everything's cool now. God is very pleased with you. And you can enjoy a normal, happy life. You can have a wife. You can have multiple wives. You can have kids. All you have to do is come down off that silly cross and give up this Messiah business. And during the Prisoner series, number 6 is repeatedly offered that same deal. Just cooperate, and this can be a really nice place. You can maybe even run it someday if you want to. And other people are seen all the time coming and going from the island, so maybe you could leave as well if you join us.
McGoohan turned the spy espionage genre on its head by inverting the ancient man versus society plot and making the ultimate inside man and tool of society, a super spy who had infiltrated conspiracies, overthrown dictators, and blackmailed others on behalf of his country, into the ultimate outsider who needed to be imprisoned and forced to tell why he had resigned. McGoohan also touched up the story with purely science fiction elements like wireless telephones, massive supercomputers, mind reading and mind altering machines, universal surveillance, secret global conspiracies, and of course, Rover.
Rover.
which is arguably the coolest, weirdest, and silliest thing on the show.
Yeah.
It's a big white balloon that chases people down and keeps them from escaping the village and sometimes kills them. Imagine being killed by a giant white balloon.
It'd be I wouldn't want that on my tombstone or in my
Rover was the inspired solution to the problem of the security robot they'd built for the show, and which sank into the sea the first time they tested it. Instead, they used hundreds of inexpensive weather balloons of various sizes, which they moved around using wires and fans, some trick photography. Some of them have water in the bottom of them to make them roll in a funny way. And they gave Rover this scary roaring sound, and it helped add to the surrealism of the show. There was also just something in the air in the late 1960s. I don't think it was just pot smoke, but
no.
There were huge cultural shifts going on everywhere.
Yeah, there was this really high tension between the conformist world of television writing and the massive upheavals that were going on in society that were trying to leak through in various places. So, for example, it was the height of the Cold War. It was the youth movement, as we've already discussed. It was the civil rights movement. There were assassinations that had already happened and more that were happening in the future. The Vietnam War was not going well. The United States was losing credibility all over the world. There were uprisings in Europe against the Soviet Union. It was a very volatile time. In the late 60s, Maharishi Mahesh Yoga and the Transcendental Movement was cross-pollinating popular culture with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. A few years later, Werner Erhard would create the Erhard Seminar Training, or EST, which you might have heard of, a very me-centric movement. Stan Kubrick's mind-blowing 2001 A Space Odyssey was released in April of 1968, and his A Clockwork Orange, a film about, hey, guess what? Using conditioning to change someone's personality for the good of society, was released in 1971. In February of 1968, The Planet of the Apes premiered. Now, The Planet of the Apes, again, I'm going to spoil this for you just so you know. So if you haven't heard about it or you haven't seen it, go watch it and then come back. Is about a competent, intelligent, cynical man who volunteered for a long-duration space mission because he wanted to resign from the human race. But instead, he finds himself inside a prison in a village run by apes. And the fact that he can talk and think makes him both a curiosity and a threat to the authoritarian ape society in which he finds himself. He finally escapes and discovers that he's actually back on Earth, and the whole screwed up upside-down culture is the result of a nuclear war which humanity had inflicted on itself. It was a really actually great year for science fiction and horror that year, 1968. We get Charlie that year, which is the novel Flowers for Algernon, which you should go read right now. The Night of the Living Dead comes out, and Rosemary's Baby also is dropped that year. Now, the war between Number 6 and the Village, back in The Prisoner, went on for 17 episodes. And while we won't spoil the ending for you, what we can say is that the conflict was resolved in a way that was triumphant and tragic and very disorienting. There was a Prisoner TV series, a sequel miniseries in 2009, which was universally panned by everybody, and about which we shall never speak again. It had a good cast. Ian McKellen was in it, but man, that thing stank on ice. So, what was it about The Prisoner, a show for which there was no template and for which had no existing intellectual property like Marvel or the DC Universe, that made it so enduring and watchable and influential all these years later? Because if you go looking for it, you will find The Prisoner's fingerprints all over the place.
Chris Carter, the producer of The X-Files, called The Prisoner the Gone with the Wind of its genre. The Guardian wrote that, quote, without The Prisoner, we'd never have had cryptic, mind-bending TV series like Twin Peaks or Lost. It's the Citizen Kane of British TV, a program that changed the landscape, unquote. In Babylon 5, you'll find the telepathic villain Mr. Bester giving a little salute and saying, be seeing you. Absolutely prisoner-based.
Oh, yeah.
An homage to The Prisoner. In the 2003 reboot of Battlestar Galactica from 2003 to 2009, writer-producer Ronald D. Moore says the character of Number 6 was named as an homage to The Prisoner. On the ABC show Lost, people are trapped on an island where time operated differently. Oh, really?
Yeah, very differently.
And where the people are the unwilling subjects of an unexplained experiment by some unseen but nearly omnipotent force. Some people even manage to find a way off the island, but never for very long. In the Many Happy Returns episode of The Prisoner, which is my personal favorite episode.
Yeah, it was a good episode. Really
number
good.
6 makes it out of the village. Off the island and all the way back to London, he finds a helpful woman living in his own apartment, which has remained mostly unchanged. His old car is still there. He drives back to his old offices and lays out the situation to his old colleagues, who eventually agree to help him locate the village and expose the conspiracy. But it doesn't work out that way. He ends up back in the village, and that helpful woman back in London turns out to have been the new number 2. So it's this whole circular thing. You can see clear echoes of The Prisoner in The X-Files and in Mr. Robot and Enemy of the State and The Truman Show and the Teletubbies.
Yeah, I did not know about the Teletubbies
until the Teletubbies. The American version of the Teletubbies is first of all, Teletubbies is an island-wide surveillance system with speakers that rise from the earth as needed. So that's The Prisoner right there.
Uh-huh.
And in the US version, Time for Tubby Bye-Bye is a female voice coming from those speakers to end the show.
Time for Tubby Bye-Bye. Time for Tubby Bye-Bye.
And is so similar to the prisoner's disembodied speaker voice throughout the village as to be striking. In The Matrix, as Neo is running from Agent Smith in an apartment building, we see an elderly woman watching TV. Agent Smith morphs into her and throws a knife at Neo, and you can see that she is watching an episode of The Prisoner. Speaking of Keanu Reeves, in the John Wick universe, and you kept saying this while we were watching, oh my God, it's John Wick.
Yep.
The John Wick universe, everyone is in on the conspiracy. Everything is managed by the High Table, and all the strings are pulled by a man known only as the Elder. And there's a scene in the first John Wick movie, I believe it is, where you realize everyone in the entire city is in on it.
Oh yeah. The very ending when Ian McShane has everybody stop in their tracks, and everyone out by the fountain and everyone within visual range stops, and crap, everyone's on. That's the part. That's the Many Happy Returns part
episode.
That really worked in the prison. That really jumped it up a level. It's like, oh, this guy can make it all the way back to London, all the way back to his own home and his own car and his own office, only to discover they all got there first. They were all in on it, and they all conspired to put him right back on the island. Oh, that's how big the conspiracy is, and that's how advanced its knowledge is of what you're likely going to do. Yeah. And it really expanded the universe immensely in that way by letting him out off the island and letting him back into London.
In the 2000 movie High Fidelity, the characters Rob Gordon and Marie DeSalle briefly mention both loving The Prisoner, and Barry helps out by remembering that the lead was Patrick McGoohan.
It's McGoohan! It's Patrick McGoohan! Now, in the 1975 Columbo episode, Patrick McGoohan was very good friends with Peter Falk. He was in a bunch of episodes. And this one he actually directed. It was called Identity Crisis. He plays a CIA agent who keeps using the "be seeing you" phrase over and over again throughout the episode. So, guess what he's doing? Early in the episode, he also wears a dark jacket with white piping, which is remarkably similar to the jacket he wore as number 6. In the Mad Men Season 6 episode, The Crash, the Draper kids are watching The Prisoner's episode Free for All. But for my money, the greatest homage has to be in the Krusty Gets Busted episode of The Simpsons, where Homer is kidnapped after accidentally finding out about a vast conspiracy and is placed on a thing called the Island. Patrick McGoohan himself provides the voice of a character of himself as number 6, and the reason given as to why he's on the island is because he invented the bottomless peanut bag. And now, Blue Gal, you have a list of things you should watch and that you shouldn't watch or needn't watch if you're going to watch The Prisoner. We suggest you do.
Well, actually, doing a little research into this, I found out that Patrick McGoohan is rumored to have thought that this show should have been a 7-part miniseries, and that's what I kept thinking watching it. There's one episode about going to Harmony, which is a town that's kind of a Western that absolutely does not appear to really belong in this series, except for the ending. And I won't give away the ending. The ending is very weird of that episode, but otherwise it really doesn't fit. And that episode about Harmony was not aired originally on CBS. It just didn't fit into the show, or there was some sort of censor problem or whatever. It just didn't appear in the States at the initial outing of The Prisoner. But Patrick McGoohan had 7 episodes that he thought should be in the series, and I agree with them. McGoohan's 6 of 7 were Arrival, which is first episode, Free for All, The Chimes of Big Ben. Then the 4th one we're not quite sure about, but we suggest it might be The Schizoid Man.
Yeah, that's a good episode.
Many Happy Returns. Again, that's my favorite episode where he goes to London and comes back and everybody's in on it. And then the last 2 episodes, Once Upon a Time and Fallout, are really a 2-parter and sum up the episodes with a most unsatisfying ending for some people.
Mm-hmm.
We love The Prisoner, I think, in part because it's a puzzle.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, how do you put these pieces together to figure out where Patrick McGoohan is and how he can get out of this? And I don't know if there can really be a satisfactory answer to the puzzle, especially as the counterculture late 1960s brought all authority into question, brought reality into question for a lot of people, and certainly power structures into deep relief in terms of what authority is and whether working for an authority is a good idea or not. Whether you can be a hero and still work for the man was definitely being called into question in those years.
Well, FYI, if you also want to avoid an episode, it's you can skip Do Not Forsake Me, Oh My Darling.
Yeah, you can.
Which McGoohan was off shooting Ice Station Zebra with Rock Hudson, and I hope he got handsomely paid for that because that's not a good movie. It's an okay movie, but it's not a good movie. But he wasn't there. So they had to do a Gilligan's Island brain swap thing where they brought in another actor who did a perfectly fine job, but they made him into Patrick McGoohan. Made him number 6 by swapping their brains.
Swapping brains, yeah.
And they did a couple of clever things, I will admit. They did they reshot the opening with this other guy driving the Lotus and this other guy going into the office, which was kind of funny, and screwed up the continuity badly. They did something they should not have done, which was they gave number 6, it never mentioned his name, they gave number 6 a fiance.
Oh, yeah.
And they said that his fiance was the daughter of his boss, which is like, no. Everything about his past is mysterious. He's not involved in a family. He doesn't have family. He doesn't have women or children involved in his world at all. That really goofed things up. On the other hand, there was an episode where the entire episode is him reading children's stories to kids, which the first time I saw it, I thought was kind of cute and charming. And the second time I saw it, it was horrifying because you realize, oh my God, the village imprisons children. Yeah. This is not a bedtime story in someone's home. It's the nursery. It's where children are kept. Children are being kept prisoner on the island, maybe to blackmail their parents. Maybe people on the island had kids, but they're being raised apart from adults. And that's where it gets, there's deeper meanings going on here than you get in the first or second viewing. And if I could recommend one piece of supplemental reading, not about The Prisoner specifically, but about TV in that era generally, it's Harlan Ellison's television reviews that were compiled into 2 books called The Glass Teat and The Other Glass Teat. And he wrote some really good television reviews about writing, because he was doing writing for television at the time, what it was like to write for TV, how conformist television was, how nearly impossible it was to get anything on the air that had any social value at all. It covers, as I recall, the canceling of the Smothers Brothers, which was, you're not supposed to do political things anywhere outside of a drama, and they had a comedy show and they were making jokes about politics and they got snuffed. So understanding the era that this television show comes from and how crushingly straight and white and boring and rigid it was, and how completely different this was than anything that had come before it, and how it had used a genre that it had built almost from scratch to smuggle in this other thing, this really wild, thoughtful, thought-provoking, mind-blowing show about individuality and the place of the individual in society, and can you ever really escape fate? And in the end, society will always win. The system will always win, and eventually, you will come over to their side, whether you know it or not. It are all great themes to talk about, and to sneak it into a spy show It's really clever. And I'm glad Patrick McGoohan used his clout to do that as opposed to doing something silly, which he did later in his career, which he had every right to do.
Science Fiction University is a project of DGBG Productions. You can support the show by donating via Patreon. Details are at our website, sciencefictionuniversity.com.
Be seeing you.
Be seeing you.